Dr. Jack Cornfield, a clinical psychologist, tells the story of a 14-year-old in a juvenile institution that dealt with young gang members who had committed homicide. The 14-year-old had killed an innocent boy to prove himself to a gang. The mother of the victim sat impassively through the trial until the guilty verdict was declared. And then she stood up, looked directly at her son's murderer, and said, "I'm going to kill you." And she went home, and for the next 6 months, after she came back to home after work, she lay on her bed, and she moaned, and she groaned, and she wept. The Apostle Paul writes, "All creation has been groaning, as in the pangs of childbirth, right up to the present time. We too groan inwardly, waiting for our adoption as children of God." Like Lee said, he's speaking to the church in Rome, the center of the Roman Empire, the home of Gentiles. There are Jews there, but it's largely a Gentile place. And there is this great divide, this question, are Jews and Gentiles supposed to come together in the church? In the early church, this was a large question because, of course, it was first a Jewish movement and then broke off and became both Jews and Gentiles. So Paul has had experience with people who are bound deeply by this issue, this problem. It happens in our life that we get the feeling that we don't belong. You can see how that would be happening in the church. There would be people on both sides who felt they didn't belong, Gentile and Jew together. It happens to us too. We feel that we don't deserve a place like everyone else has a place. Perhaps it's the death of a loved one, it's divorce, it's war, it's a disease. And when you look at the prayer concerns lifted up in this room over the course of a month, you see several causes for groaning. There is suffering that is too deep for words. There are wounds that are too deep for Band-Aids. There are valleys of the shadow that are too deep for hope. And what do? We groan. Of course, part of our problem is that we don't groan. We don't go all the way to the place of groaning. We're like kids that are in the gang, right? And the gang, which has this immense loyalty and is tightly defined by certain actions and signs, and those gangs, they don't go to the place of groaning to solve problems. They go to the place of violence to solve problems. And of course, we all belong to things that are not unlike gangs. Maybe we don't have the same violence, but we have a bond or an identity that gives us the idea that we're pitted against somebody else. It could be the Hatfields and the McCoys, a family bond, It could be churches, denominations, different faiths that we think we're opposed to other faiths. Or even here in Granby, here we have a sister church, First Church and South Church, and we can get the idea that, we're somehow opposed to them, when in fact we have the very same mission, you know? And of course it happens among nations as well, where we think that we are naturally opposed to other nations unless they think exactly the way that we do. But while all of these organizations are essential and important, it's important for people to get together in groups where they can have a sense of identity and like-mindedness and find support and give support. All of those are good things. It's not that these are bad. But on the day of Pentecost, when the church is born, something else happens. That is, people stream into Jerusalem from almost every nation in the known world at the time, in the Mediterranean world. And there, streamed in together, the Holy Spirit, the great balloon, does its thing. And it fills these people with a sense of identity and purpose that goes beyond all of these lesser gangs. It doesn't destroy those identities, but it goes beyond them and shows that all of humankind is connected through the Holy Spirit. So the church is born, and its job is to embody this idea, to make it a reality. Easy to say, hard to do. Because when most of us look to solve the problems in our lives, we solve them in terms of those groups that I'm calling gangs. We solve them in terms of our own tribe, our Hatfields and McCoys. We serve them and we solve them in terms of our own group, not taking the other group into consideration. Easy to say what the church's job is, but hard to do. Think of getting Palestinians and Jews together. Okay, it just doesn't seem all that realistic, right? But both sides have grievances and sufferings, groanings. Or think of the suffering in Latin America. Jobless teenagers and poverty, drug gangs, and desperation propels young people to risk their lives to get into the United States of America to live a better life. Groans and sufferings. And on the other hand, there is the groans of our own nation to provide work for all of its citizens, to create a stable financial foundation so the ground won't fall out from under our economy, to be fair to those who have come to this country within the law. There are groans there as well. How are they going to be solved? Or think of carrying a placard that says, Black Lives Matter. There's a part of me that jumps up and says, well, so do white lives. Yes, that's true. But let us not dismiss the cleavage between the two. Let us not dismiss the suffering from which the placard originates in the first place. Something is amiss. And if you can't go all that way and think of those kinds of issues, just think of this. Your whole family, including your in-laws, showing up at your house for Thanksgiving. I mean, there's a little bit of groaning that goes on there too as well, right? Okay, wait. I've got some in-laws here today. I better be careful of that one. The point is, we often try to solve these issues without going all the way to groaning and protecting our own group. When you hold both sides of the issue in your hand, there are only murmurs and groans expressing the feelings of helplessness. Paul is saying there is something larger that can help us solve it, but it's not going to help us unless we groan or weep. And that is when the Holy Spirit steps in. In Manila last January, a little girl, Giselle Palomar, said to Pope Francis in front of 1 million people that she scrounged food from garbage and slept on a cardboard mat. And then through tears she said to him, "Terrible things happen to children. It's not their fault. Why does God permit it?" An entirely unscripted question. And so was his answer. He didn't correct her theology or otherwise attempt to pacify her. Rather, he enfolded the sobbing child in his arms. And then he admonished everyone to pay close attention because he said, and I quote, "She has just asked one of the questions with no answer." And then to the girl he said, "Only when we are able to weep about the things you have lived will we understand anything and be able to give an answer to you." And then he turned to the crowd and said, "The world needs to weep. The marginalized weep, the scorned weep, but we who are more or less without needs, well, we don't know how. We must learn to weep. There are realities in this life that you can see only with cleansed eyes that are clarified by tears. To be a good Christian, you must learn to weep." Whenever we're asked a question that has no answer, our first answer must be silence, and then a word born of tears. Or in Paul's language today, a word born of groans. Paul's metaphor for groaning is labor. It's birth. And I hate being a male ever to make comments about the birthing process because, of course, I'm always in danger of going home and discovering that I really know nothing about it because, I may have been in the room at the time, and in fact, I was in the room at the time, but when I was helping with the Lamaze breathing, well, I hyperventilated and got green, and the nurse looked at me and said, "You're in trouble, son. Breathe into this bag." And she gave me a bag, and I breathed into the bag, and I came back to consciousness. So I always hesitate to talk about the groaning of labor and giving birth. But it's a tremendous, marvelous metaphor for us. All creation is groaning, Paul says, and has been from the very beginning and even up to now. Things aren't quite right. They need to be better. Something is calling to be born. And you must descend into that groaning. And when you descend into that groaning, then the Holy Spirit moves and takes our groaning and guides us. The Christian tradition has this idea that at the end of time, God will make God's home on earth and all people will come together for a great feast. This is what we're groaning for. We're groaning for this great feast of all people. Our hope isn't that everyone in the world is converted to Christianity. That would just make Christianity another gang, trying to get everybody else on our side. Our hope is that the Spirit will lead us through our groaning to the place where all people can feast together. And it's easy. It's easy to think that, that's never going to happen. I don't know, maybe you believe in that idea or maybe you don't, but I want to hold on to that dearly with hope because there are signs of it coming. Remember the mother whose son had been killed? After 6 months of groaning and weeping, she finally was given guidance and direction. She visited her boy's killer, the one that she said she would kill. He had been living on the streets before the killing, and she discovered that she was the only visitor that he had in jail. They talked for a while. She gave him some money for cigarettes. And she visited him a little more regularly, bringing some food, small gifts. It increased to 2, 3 times, sometimes 4 times a month. Near the end of his 3-year sentence, she asked him what he would be doing when he got out. He was confused and uncertain. So she offered to set him up with a job at a company that a friend of hers worked at. He said, "Oh, okay." Then she asked where he would live, and he said, "I'm from the streets. I got no family. I got no home." So she offered him a spare room in her house. And for 8 months after he got out, he lived there, he ate her food, and he worked at the job. And then one evening, she called him into the living room to talk. "Do you remember in the courtroom when I said that I was going to kill you?" she asked. "Oh, yes," he said. "I remember that." "Well," she said, "I did not want the boy who could kill my son for no reason to remain alive. I wanted him to die, but I didn't know what to do. And all I could do for 6 months was weep and moan, and then finally it occurred to me. I couldn't kill you, but I could kill the boy who killed my son for no reason. And that's why I started visiting you, bringing you things, getting you the job, and letting you live here in my house. That's how I went about changing you. And that old boy, that boy that shot my son, he's gone now. So I want to ask you, since my son is gone and that killer is gone, would you stay here? I've got room. And if you'd like to, if you'd let me, I want to adopt you." And because she allowed herself to live with the groans of grief, because she did not try immediately to solve the problem, the Holy Spirit interceded. And the boy became the son she lost, and she became the mother he never had. This is the hope that is unseen that Paul speaks of. This is the hope for the whole planet that Paul speaks of, that we can't see, but the Holy Spirit can guide us to bringing into reality. This idea in the Christian tradition that at the end of all time, God makes God's home with humankind, and there's this great feast to which people from all over the globe stream, it's a marvelous picture. And this mother has brought us a step closer to that. It's in some ways, it's like a great expanded Memorial Day parade, There's fire trucks coming down the street, but they're from Granby and Gutenberg and Basel and Tehran and Stockholm and Johannesburg. And there are picnics sharing hot dogs and sushi and kielbasa and kung pao chicken and falafel. There are flags from every nation that are waving. There are songs from every culture that are being sung with gusto. This is the picture that drives the church. And in our best moments, this is the picture that drives our nation as well. Oh, it's going to happen. Down deep in my heart, I feel it's going to happen. We may not live to see it happen, but we will be part of it. For we are the church And the Spirit is propelling us wherever it will.